last of the year, 80-degree weather, I heard, to the Tandem Press Department of Art visiting Artist Series. We would like to acknowledge the most generous contribution we received from the Anonymous Fund for this program tonight. Tonight we are thrilled to have Robert Yoder, who is making his very first prints at Tandem Press. And we're delighted that we have two of our printers here in the audience tonight, so you can also meet them later after the talk. And I'm also delighted to see the youngest audience member we've ever seen here, Lily Cranover. So, Robert was born in Virginia and currently lives and works in Seattle. We've had the pleasure of hearing Robert speak about his work at Tandem during the past week. And I wanted to just let you know that he would like you to ask as many questions as you would like, both during and after his talk. In his work, you will see that his elegant compositions hint at aerial views of utopian landscapes without the specificity of location. He deconstructs scavenged street signs and remakes them as abstract assemblages. Reference materials like atlases and topographical maps inspire his works visually and also inform his choice of titles. Robert exhibits his work regularly in New York at the Charlie Coles Gallery and at galleries throughout the United States and most specifically in the Pacific Northwest. His work has been extremely favorably reviewed on a national level and is included in many distinguished museum and corporate collections, including the Museum of Fine Arts in Houston, Texas, the Tacoma Museum, and the Microsoft Corporation. Please join me in welcoming Robert Yoder.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone, for coming. I hope you can hear me. I didn't know if there was going to be a microphone kind of deal or not, so if I'm not talking loud enough, just let me know. You got the very pleasant introduction just a minute ago, but actually I was born in Virginia, and as soon as I got out of undergraduate school, where I did my undergraduate in metalwork and jewelry, I realized that the furthest place you could get from Virginia was Seattle. So that was what informed my decision to go to graduate school out there. And once I got there, I realized just how very beautiful it was, and so decided to stay. I've been there for 19 years now, and I don't really think I'm gonna end up moving. I'm going to start with the images here. If you could do the lights, please. In 1992, I was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma. And this is an image of the top of my feet where they do this rather medieval incision and find a nerve that they can inject a dye into. And it just kind of sums up that whole period. It lasted for the whole summer. For me, it started in spring at the diagnosis and then worked its way through to fall as far as the radiation treatments and the follow-up visits and everything that continued with that. And for me, this kind of sums it all up, that it was so very bizarre to just put your hands in someone else's control and go with it. Part of the radiation treatment really knocks you out. I mean, you're just exhausted. So I found that I did nothing but stare at the floor, notice interesting designs that was in the Formica or the wood patterns on things. So I did a lot of looking because I didn't have any strength to do any making. So these two pieces are kind of in reaction to all of that. This is several years later, but it still informs the way that I'm thinking and the way that I'm working. And those stitches, for me, these pieces are about those stitches and how, you know, I just can't get that part of my life out of my life, of course. So things keep reverting back to it. They're also very much about landscape. These are made from wooden road signs. So for these, it was basically a sign that was left turn only or something like that. And you've got these bigger, broader areas that were the arrows, and then all these smaller little squiggly parts were the actual words that the signs had. I got very, very fortunate and was able to get a truckload of signs at an auction. And so they've become the basic material that I use. Here's some other ones. Again, it's about the landscape thing. I'm very interested in looking down on the landscape, which comes back from the radiation treatment time where all you could do is look down on the floor. And I'm also very interested in looking at the landscape in a profile view. So for me, as I'm making these, I just start to create the city or the portion of the city that the work is about. And so something becomes the driveway, which leads to the building, but all of a sudden the building becomes the actual parking lot. And so things start to take on several meanings at the same time for the shapes. Here's some other ones. These were from construction type signs, mostly that kind of do not enter, wrong way, you know, left lane closed and such. I'm very interested in this kind of lazy arm motif. I probably didn't bring an awful lot of that particular image, but it is a shape that reappears over and over. The piece on the right here is, at times for me, it's kind of screwy. It's almost like the front of a Nordic boat or a gondolier kind of boat, and then you know, it turns into a smokestack at some point for me. So you know, again, it's about the landscape. The variety of squares, of course, references the way a landscape looks if you're in an airplane and you look out the window and here's one part of the farm, here's another part. And there's a little bit of relief on these. There are several different signs were cut up to make each of these, and some signs are much, much thicker. So I don't have a lot to work with when you work with a sign. So playing with those little things like a little bit of relief or a little bit of the change from a pale orange to a medium orange to a more vibrant orange, or a very brand new sign that's very shiny and clean versus one that's been, you know, used and scuffed up and has tar and scratches on it. Those are the things that are, you know, my materials basically. And so I very much set up a limitation on what I have, what I'm doing, and how much I can get anything done. So a lot of this, you know, I end up with a big pile of scraps that I choose to work with. Here's two more, very much about the looking down at a building, looking prospectively with the driveway. The building becomes a parking lot. Here's two of the biggest pieces that I've done. When scale changes, it allows you to use things like the alphabet. It is much more noticeable because it's so much bigger. In the piece on the left here, it's 4 foot by 8 foot. The piece on the right is 5 foot by 8 foot. And the piece on the right actually is touring in a show right now that's about the Lewis and Clark experience. So I thought it was very interesting that a curator called up and said, I need some work. You've got the right piece. And I was like, well, I was not thinking about Lewis and Clark whatsoever when I made this. But I thought it was an interesting take on that kind of frontier landscape and how man starts to encroach on it. And after Lewis and Clark, that's when it all started to snowball. So here's that piece in my studio while I'm working on it. I was getting ready to ship off a bunch of work, so that's kind of piled up in the background. But I do everything on the floor when I'm working with these. And you can see the edges are all sticking out. So actually this is probably 6 foot by 9 foot at this point. It's a much bigger piece than what it ends up being. All of these pieces are then glued to another sheet of plywood, and then a framework is put on the back of it so it becomes a very solid object. This piece in particular was too big to put together in my studio, so I had to take it up more or less piece by piece upstairs to the carport outside and do it there. I never would have been able to get it up through the stairwell at 5 foot by 8 foot. So, and just so you don't think that that I keep a really clean and beautiful studio, that this looks like this is the opposite side. This is just I've got many boxes of little scraps from these that, since they're it's very arbitrary as to which sign you're going to get and when you're going to get it. It's very difficult to throw away anything because you might need it at some point. Here's 2 more. These are made from those pedestrian crossing signs. Those are probably the most difficult signs to get. They're really thin, and it seems that I get all my signs from the Department of Transportation in Seattle, and I've got a nice little agreement set up with them where they hold off and save them for me. So I'm at their mercy as far as what to get. And they called me up one day and said, "We've got a few, would you like them?" And I said, "Yes, please," and went down and got them. And it was about 8 of just these yellow and black signs. And you just kind of feel like, I'm in heaven, this is great. But I've only, the sign itself is maybe almost 3 foot square. Every time I get the yellow signs, I make these little tiny, tiny things because I don't know, there's something about not wanting to find out that you're making something bigger than the amount of material that you actually have. This one there's a few that I've done where I've actually combined drastic signs. This has just a little bit of yellow in it from those crosswalk signs. The sign on the right was actually a hand-painted sign as an advertisement. So I'm not exclusively limiting myself to road signs, and you'll see as we go a little bit into the work here, I'm actually kind of working my way away from using them. But this has been like the bread and butter. This is what I do, it seems. The sign on the left was for an office supply company. And it kind of seemed fitting that it would have this kind of armed office chair shape in the center of it for me. The sign on the right was one of those no parking signs, so it gets, of course, very busy with the streets and the areas where supposedly a car would be. Here's 2 more. The blue sign was for basically celebrating the fact that such and such a business cleans the sidewalk. There's this whole hierarchy to the signs as far as what their colors are and what they mean. That I don't know. Sometimes I try to make it work with the pieces, and sometimes it's just the fact that it's black and white, and that's a very easy and graphic way to work. The piece here on the left is 4 foot by 4 foot, and some of these parts here in it, up in these little areas here, you can see the seams where all the pieces are cut. Some of those are about 1/4 of an inch by 1/4 of an inch. And for me, that's where the real pleasure of making these comes. When it just gets so detail-oriented and you're just plugging away at this little bitty thing here in front of you, and then all of a sudden, it works out to be this much, much bigger thing. For me, that's the real joy of working with these. Some of them are much more simple, only because at times you want things to be simple. But for me, this was one of my most favorite pieces because it involved just such a ridiculous amount of cutting wood. And of course, I'm cutting it on one of those chop saws, and when it's that tiny, it's that like, you're not going to cut your finger off, are you, kind of thing. So you have to kind of get in the studio and really pay attention to what you're doing. Here's 2 more. The one on the right-hand side, Seattle Art Museum has purchased, and it's made of Legos. So I started trying to find ways to create this imagery without being, I don't know, dependent upon whatever the city would give me. As soon as I started working with Legos, they started discontinuing all the colors that I wanted to work with. So I just felt like that I was out of materials. The piece on the right, the big one, it's about 6 foot square, and so there's just thousands of Legos that all were pressed in. That one was a real hassle to make, but at the end, you look back and you go, I'm so glad I did this. Here's 2 more Lego pieces. You can actually see the top where the Legos are. This whole method of working is so very different from the road signs. With the road signs, you can cut out a few shapes, lay them down, push them around, take this one out, put something in. With the Legos, you start at the bottom row and you work your way up, and inevitably you get halfway up and you realize that something's wrong down at the bottom, so you have to take the whole thing apart to fix that. And it becomes this whole different method of working. I enjoyed working with the Legos, but once they started discontinuing black, white, and red, which I think are like the 3 most popular colors if you're making art. Once they started doing that, I just didn't want to have anything else to do with them. You can buy Legos, in bulk packs of the colors, but and they've reintroduced black, white, and red. But for me, it was just such a turnoff at a time when I really, really needed them that I don't want to pursue that. Then you wouldn't have that shiny, brand new plastic surface that they really do have this gorgeous plastic shine to them. A lot of people offered to donate their children's Legos, and you know how many kids have chewed on them and they're just scratched up and filthy, and I just wanted the clean, brand new ones. I wanted that really clean. All along this time that I'd been doing this work, I'd been looking and taking photographs, and mostly just taking photographs for myself. It wasn't like I wanted to photograph things and make fine art out of it, but I noticed this weird optical thing that the sphere at the top here is the same thing taken at the same time of the day, but it was in such a place and the clouds were in such a place that with the shadow being created on it, it made the reverse of itself. So over here it's very active, but this dark ball that's falling down. And over here it was completely blank sky, and it was all just based upon whether you're standing and looking at it from this side or if you walk around and look at it from this side. And it just struck me as such an odd thing that I immediately went back and got the camera and took a picture of it. And everybody asked, well, what is that thing? What is that thing? And it was just a street lamp, that in the middle of the day, but it was just such a perfect lineup with the shadow going and the shadow not going on it. So that got me to thinking about these spheres, and there was all this talk about going to Mars and all this all of a sudden everything just started making sense. So I decided I'd make this image of the planet Mars. Because having done the Legos, I figured, well, this is just as tedious and time-consuming as that could ever be. It's about 4 foot diameter, and this on the right-hand side, it's a detail of it. It's all magazine clippings that are about a ½ inch square. So you just start gluing them, working from the darkest to the lightest and trying to blend them to get this sphere thing. And I thought, this is great, but I don't want to do the whole solar system. But I did want to do the sun. The interesting thing about the sun was, as I was working on it, I was like, the sun doesn't cast a shadow the way you think of a planet casting a shadow. So how do you make it look like a sphere when there's no shadow around the edges? So I had to go in and paint the background black just to make it stand out in front of itself. But then, of course, also go in and add the sunspots to give it a little bit of depth here and there. That got me to thinking back to the road sign stuff and how could I make something that alluded to a sphere without being so graphic about doing it. So the piece on the right here is called Four Suns, and it was an experiment for me to figure out just how very little information could I leave in the picture and allow the picture itself to be successful. So we've got these four suns floating around in here, but then at some point it's not four, there's five of them there, and then all of a sudden, well, it's not really any of them there. So it creates this great kind of tension for me. I've done a lot of work where I cut up shopping bags from, actually I really enjoy cutting up shopping bags from the most expensive stores as possible. So a friend of mine who somehow or another has all the money in the world, and she goes shopping at Tiffany's and Hermes and Prada and gives me her shopping bags. This one on the left is Victoria's Secret, which I don't think is that expensive, but it has this lovely pink stripe thing going on. And so I had to go back in with this and start dealing with alphabet in a way that was a bit different for me because the bag itself didn't have any lettering printed on it. So these are all stickers. The piece on the right is also those vinyl peel and stick letters. So I start playing with the alphabet and how can I destroy the alphabet, keep it a very fluid looking graphic thing. It resembles an alphabet, but there's nothing to be read on it. Here's some more stickers. This one's actually some stickers that were on a manila folder, so it's only about 4 inches square. The piece on the right was this big advertisement for Hewlett-Packard that I've just started really zeroing in on the most mundane thing that I can find and see if I can rearrange it in some way to make it interesting. It also is only about 4 inches, 5 inches tall. Both of those are very tiny. This is one of the first pieces I've done where I actually put down the image on paper. This is a diptych that has, it has some of those stickers going on, but it also has black electric tape and also Sumi ink. So you have these 3 different blacks all on one picture plane. And theoretically when they line up, the black lines meet, so it makes this huge building, basically, but also, overhead view of an item. This was fun to work on. I've done a few since, and I didn't feel that it was particularly the most interesting way for me to work, but I think that you kind of have to do more than one. You do one and you like it, but you have to crank out a few more just to make sure that you're doing the right thing, or maybe you just got lucky. I'm in the camp right now that I just got lucky with this one. The other ones were okay, but they were more or less an imitation of this. But I think that's an important thing as an artist, is that you do continue with those mistakes, even while you're watching them fall apart in front of you, and it's like there's nothing that can save this, which is what my current work right now is, just packed with that kind of problem, I guess, that it makes it more exciting because then you have something that you can solve, or that you can hopefully solve. On the right, it's some more shopping bags, like Ferragamo shopping bag, I believe. And on the left here, it was a poster congratulating the advertisers and thanking them for their support for some stupid software place out in Seattle. So I really just decided anything is fair game at this point, and I can use it. I'm not worried about the archival quality of work. I think it's anytime I purchase work, I'm purchasing it for me. I'm not buying it for my children, and I'm not buying it to make a name for myself if I were to donate it to a museum later on. I think the reason to own work is because you like it. If you know going into it, which I fully explain to anybody, this is not archival, it's going to change over time. If you know that going into the purchasing, then watching it change over the course of years is part of the work. And so it should be embraced instead of this, you know, it's not the most archival paper, it's a poster, and this is a shopping bag, you know, and the tape that's holding it together is going to leach through in 40 years, and I don't care. That's going to become part of the work itself. So something to consider when you're making work. I've started doing these really architectural pieces. A lot of them are based on the Savoy House, the Corbusier Savoy House, which is similar to this one on the right. It's a house on stilts, basically. So I kind of started this whole stilt house thing going on that I've become very interested in. That center of the yellow on that one is from a magazine cover, and so they had used a super reflective metallic ink. It's almost like its own separate paper that's been glued on top. So as you're looking at it, you can kind of see yourself moving, so you become part of it also, that the surface of the paper, as you move around, the light reflects very differently. And so, of course, since I'm doing these architectural things, I've gave myself this little exercise on making little tiny collages in the least amount of time as possible, just to get the kind of, I don't know, where you fuss over something and you're like, is this right or is this right? When you give yourself just like 2 minutes and you've got to get something done, you don't have time to fuss over it. You just cut and work. These are super tiny. They're about 2.5 inches high, I think. And they're just taken from magazines. And it's a really quick study. It's a way for me to kind of break away from looking at something and pondering and obsessing, and you know, I'll make something, but I won't glue it together, and I'll come back and look at it again one day and back again the next day. This way you just kind of break from that for a few minutes. You realize, here's some shapes that I find interesting. You know, here's some ways of the house is standing up, but the sky is upside down. Here's some things that I'd like to think about when I go back to making the real work. I don't consider these real work. I consider them kind of studies to help figure out how to make things and how to keep shapes interesting. So those have led to these pieces where I'm more interested in the actual shape and the way space can go back and come forward at seemingly the same time. I take a lot of drawings of kitchen advertisements from magazines and just do them in black and white, and then I'll cut them up. The piece on the right drew the magazine ad pretty much to scale, cut it up, filled it in with paint. Those are much more interesting ways for me to work, but I need that kind of break from that so that I'm not obsessing over, does this line go here, does it move over? There's so many variables that are out there that you just, at some point you just have to make a decision and go with it and hope for the best. You know. The piece on the left here, I've started using paint, which is something that I haven't painted since the early 80s. So color for me has been pretty much orange, black, white, or yellow. And it's this whole new thing for me. So I've started painting, and I've just gotten these little gradations going on. The pink is sticker. The tan is a much bigger sticker. So I'm being very, very timid with my painting at this point. Here's two more. They're all just kitchen counters that have been cut up and put back together. And the nice thing about counters is that they're always taken in this really dramatic perspective. There's nothing on the countertops. It's just a series of rectangles, which is a good place for me to start being interested in space and the perspective thing like this. The one on the right is some more of the shopping bag stuff, but I'm bringing in that element of the Savoy house again, the house on stilts kind of thing. This one on the left, I think, these were worked on at pretty much the same time. I tend to work on 2 or 3 pieces at once. And I'm not sure which one was a reaction to the other one. It was like, let's keep this nice and white and clean. And then this one was, let's really explode space and make it so that it's coming out or going in at the same time into this kind of black hole. The blacks in that center aren't really reading very well, but there's several of them, so even it has a little bit of space within it. On the left is one of those hazard barrier signs. This piece was done several years ago, and I always loved it and this kind of broken up herringbone pattern that's going on. So then I discovered that hazard tape, which has just been fabulous as far as I'm concerned. Like the piece on the left here is about 6 foot square. The piece on the right is only 16 inches square, but I feel like I'm getting that same kind of busyness and at a much easier way. That tape is so inexpensive. You can make one of these and see if it's something that's going to work or not. So I made one and had it produced into wallpaper. The interesting thing with this one, because I feel like I'm always setting myself up for one more limitation within each piece. It's like, well, what can you do to really make this even more difficult for yourself? So for this one, all of the white areas on this side had to match up when it's flipped 90 degrees to all the white areas, so that the wallpaper would have this endless seam, I guess. So there would be no edge where this is one strip of paper and another strip. So, and of course, the bottom of this one, when it's flipped over, has to match up with the next one also. So I've set up this entirely ridiculous method to make sure that things touch each other when they're mass produced and wrapped out like this. On the right hand side, this is a shot of it installed at a Nike corporation. They were really supportive, and they bought about 10 rolls of it, and each roll is a hand silk screen that's done by a local wallpaper making company. And so it's not cheap to begin with, and then to put in 10 rolls of it was really a great thing for them to do. That was a really wonderful thing for me. I was really happy about them doing that. I've since done this in a lime green and kind of a forest green color combination, and I've also done it in a silver and black color combination. The colors are pretty endless, but the combination of the colors, whichever you pick, really change things. With the red, it's just really active and painful. With the silver and black, it's really quite peaceful, actually. It's a kind of Art Deco or something when you get the silver in there. On the right's another shopping bag thing, and that's, I'm not sure which one influenced which one here. The piece on the right is an installation at the new football stadium in Seattle, and that was what really gave me my big break as an artist. They had a simple call for artists to produce site-specific work, and I thought, oh great, it's Paul Allen. He's like the second wealthiest person in the world. Maybe I'll be able to sell him 4 little signs and I'll get, $2,000 or something for it. And I was just really excited. They phoned back and said, we want you to do something huge, and we want to pay you an awful lot more than the $2,000. I found a really good company that did this epoxy inlay in the sidewalk here. And so it came in really quickly. It came in on time and well under budget. And with that one little nudge, I guess, in the right direction, I just decided to quit my day job and really be a full-time artist. Up till then, I was working maybe 10 to 20 hours a week here and there just to make sure that there was some kind of security to pay for things. At that point, I just said, no, you've got enough money, you can live for a year. If it doesn't work out, you can always go back and work in a warehouse or something. So it worked out perfect. That was about 5 years ago, and haven't had a day job since, and I hope and pray that I don't ever have to have one again. I'm in my studio at about 10:30 every morning and stay there till 5 o'clock. I've set up a real kind of regular schedule. But part of being an artist is that you also have to do your slide labeling, and you have to make sure your resume is in place, and you have to box up work and ship it out. So a lot of studio time isn't necessarily spent producing art, and I think a lot of people have this kind of beautiful picture of people just going to their studio and putting on the beret and painting for hours and having a lovely time, and it's a hell of a lot of work. It's an awful job in many ways, but it's also the best job I think you could ever have. So any of you that are students that are pursuing it, really pursue it. It takes a long time. This was 15 years after graduate school. And you graduate and you think, I'm going to be an artist tomorrow. And you wake up the next day and it's like, nobody's looking at my work. So it takes a while, but I think the payoff is really quite excellent. You have the freedom to say, I'm not going to do any work today. I'm going to do the laundry, wash the car, that kind of stuff, go to the post office. I mean, you still have a life to live, but you don't have to work it around some weird 9-to-5 that has someone else making you do something that's really not what you want to do. This is what I really want to do, so it doesn't feel like a job. It's a pleasure to do this at all times. So that was my first real commission, I guess. And here's some pieces that are building up to the second really wonderful one here. This is using the orange and the black and looking at things from a profile view and from a bird's eye view again. So I got a commission at the Seattle airport when they added a new runway. And this was completely one of the best experiences ever dealing with something like the airport commissioner and the bureaucracy that's involved with just putting in a piece of artwork in the airport. On the left is the piece that was made for the mosaic piece on the right. This was made, took a couple of digital images of it, moved a few things around so it wouldn't be an exact duplicate of it, shrunk it down to about 6 by 9 inches, so that would be to scale, and handed it to them. And they did every single thing else. They found the mosaic guy. He did the installation. I think he did a gorgeous job. I think here's some details of it. All these little tiles are, it's surely something that I would love to do, to place in each one of these little tiles, but it's not something that I want to learn at this stage in my life. I just assume hire it out and have someone else do it. And I think that there's one, yes. Part of the installation is that there's actually 9 of these columns, and each column is done by a different artist, so it's quite a very, very diverse body of work. I think I'm the only real hard-edge geometric abstractionist that's involved. There's the kind of flowery stuff here in the background. There's several that are very, very figurative. And there's one that, when you look at it like from here to the wall over there, you would swear it was a black and white photograph. He did such a great job on that one image. And it was all in blacks and grays. And the guy that did it, Steve Miotto, did a fantastic job, I think. So I'm always looking for this kind of commission where basically where I get paid to do nothing. It's really a much, much better way than if you're going to take on a commission where you have to fabricate. You know, if I had to make the shell that the mosaic got glued onto and then bring those two halves there, strap it together, I don't know how to do that. I think it's proper that if someone else knows how to do it, hire them. And it's just a part of the budgeting to make the. I mean, for me, it's making the work. It's not making the monumental thing. And it's very much like the football stadium piece where I didn't do the actual inlay. I was responsible for where they went. I was responsible for the colors. The same here. We did a lot of color consultation going on back and forth. But in the end, all I really did was hand them this 6 by 9 inch photograph of it. So if you can get those kind of commissions, I highly recommend them. They're really the most fun to do. Here's some more of those magazine pieces, but now I've really started distorting space. I'm very, very interested in multiple views that begin to look like one thing, but then if it were a real three-dimensional object, it would fall apart. It couldn't hold itself together. It could not really be the three-dimensional object that at first glance it looks like it's going to be. Here's some more. I think like the most successful is this square tube over here where you follow it around and then when you get back it falls apart, but then you follow it around again. So I'm really interested in this whole destruction of space and how to play with that and have some fun with it. And these are much more recent works for me. I've kind of stopped doing the road sign stuff just because at some point you move on. And I started doing these very simple collages that, of course, they started out simple and then they became even more difficult, and just finding the right, because you're at the mercy of whatever advertisement is done in whatever color. So of course I'd set up a whole new situation of problems to solve. So I've been doing these, and I'm also currently doing these very large paper pieces where I'm using that hazard tape again, but I'm going back and painting, and I'm actually starting to do some drawing. I haven't done drawing since undergraduate school. And at the time, I'm pretty certain I was pretty good at drawing, like draw your face. I could draw your face. I was pretty good at that, but it was just never an interesting thing as a way of working for me. So I'm kind of becoming very timid again and starting to pull some of that back. But at the same time, I'm using images from maps and trying to get this whole space thing. So I feel like things are starting to really gel, and that everything that I've done over the past couple of years are starting to find their way into the work that I'm working on now. This is probably this is the most recent thing that I have a slide of. And I'm trying to pack in as much as possible, and kind of in reaction to beauty also. I'm trying to make it ugly, and not ugly in a bad way, but ugly in the sense that it's not these perfect right angles and straight lines and clean surfaces. I'm just going back and kind of revisiting things that I haven't ever done for such a long time. But at the same time, I'm using all these other things that I feel I'm very comfortable with working. So I've got the tape thing going on. I've got some shopping bag in it, a bunch of collage stuff that creates this kind of battleship that I call it. It's basically this pavilion and a battleship, and they're going to collide here, and it's a question of who's going to win for me. There's a little bit of drawing, there's a little bit of painting, there's an awful lot of just happenstance that you put this down and squirt some water on it and let's see what it does. Working on paper is a lot less precious, and so I feel that, spent a lot of time on that, but it's not working, so toss it into the recycle bin and just move on. I thought I'd end with this. This is what the wall right in my studio. I have this very long desk that I work at, and then also on the floor. And this is the wall of just stuff that I find really interesting, that I'll pin up and keep going back to and looking at. And so I've got these weird overhead photographs going on that kind of inform me. There's the grill of this truck that's painted this ridiculous fluorescent pink on this beat up old Ford truck. Little things like that that I just see when I'm out. These are the kind of things that I find interesting. Seattle seems to be littered with those "Hello, my name is" stickers that graffiti people will use and put their tag on it, and then they can just slap it up anywhere. They don't, you don't get caught because you're not standing there doing that. You just kind of peel it, stick it, and run. And Seattle is full of those, so I've been trying to collect a bunch of those. And then just a variety of other things. Having a jewelry background, I'm very interested in really well-made, beautiful jewelry. And then, it's mostly just little scraps of little things that you find along your way, or, postcards from places that just seem like the most ridiculous kind of postcard you could send. But someone sent it to me, and it kind of makes this interesting thing. So I'm going to end it with that. And this is kind of what really informs me as I'm working. It's not one specific thing. It's quite a collection of things. So that's our last slide, so thank you.
Does anyone have any questions for Robert?
Why did you initially begin working with road signs?
I had always been using found material, a lot of found wood. Just out of economics, basically, use found materials because you can't afford oil paint and canvas. So I'd been using painted wood for a long time, and I'd kind of gotten accustomed to this ability to use whatever you get and not really need to change it or anything. And along the way, a road sign was one of those pieces of found wood. And once I did something with that, I was like, this is really interesting. I'd like to see if I can get more road signs. So I started hunting around in salvage yards and through the DOT, and got a truckload one day and drove home with them and put them in the basement and started working. It's been a great material, certainly, to work with. But I see now that I don't know if I was part of something or if people are copying or what, but I do see other people that are using it as a material. They're doing a very, very different look with their work as opposed to mine. And so, of course, part of me is like, well, now that other people are starting to do it, I don't want to do it anymore, which is kind of foolish because oil painters don't say that about other oil painters, so it just I got lucky and got one, basically, yeah. Yes?
What kind of work are you going to be doing for the prints?
The prints that I'm doing are those, kind of based on those collage pieces, I guess, where the space starts out as one way and then it distorts to another. We're working on a trio of images that work as one big image, but each one's its own individual image. And a lot of them are very, very architectural, but also just these weird shapes that are starting to collapse on themselves. With printmaking, I'm discovering, since I've never done it before, it's a different way of working with the color. I mean, you have a lot of control over color, but not in the way that if you're looking at a magazine and you're thinking of cutting it here, maybe I'll cut it here instead. With the print, you kind of have to put it somewhere and decide, oh, maybe it should shift a little bit. So there's none of that kind of scooching stuff around as much. It's a little bit more immediate, You don't have as much play with a lot of stuff. But I'm finding ways to get around that, because that's how I think. That's how things work for me. So yes?
What was your day job?
I was working in a warehouse for a vintage clothing company. So I got really great clothing at a really cheap price. And, you know, you're folding shirts, so you don't really have to think about folding shirts. I was thinking about my work, so it was the perfect, you know, I would certainly go back to something mindless like that where you can think about what you really want to do, but it's not going to really interrupt what you're doing here. So.
Do you apply now to other public art opportunities?
I do, but I'm really picky with them. The first thing is the budget. Is the budget enough to do what they're asking for? And many times the budget's not nearly enough for what, I don't know, what the kind of brochure application thing, what they want and what they're willing to pay you to do, for me isn't enough. I found it's just a big waste of time if you're going to get $8,000, you know, to do something huge, then, you know, you're basically losing money per hour by the end of it. And that's not a way to do it. But there are still ones out there that are very, very interesting, you know, that are worth applying for. So yes, yeah. Yes.
Where do you sell most of your work, or where do you get most of your commissions?
Most of my work is sold through galleries. The gallery in New York sells a really good amount. My Seattle gallery has been very good. They sell an awful lot. I have a gallery in Portland, Santa Fe, Scottsdale, so there's always something kind of trickling in when you least expect it. Somebody, you know, there's a check in the mailbox, so it's kind of nice. But, you know, with it being sporadic like that, you never really know when that next check is, so you can't just spend the one that you've got. You kind of have to hold on to it for a bit and see. A lot of times a gallery will sell something, but it's like a month and a half or 2 months before you get paid. So yes, I know there's a check coming, but it's not here yet, you know. So you kind of have to just, you know, watch everything, because it's all very arbitrary. And, you know, in the 90s was great. Everybody was fighting over everybody to buy work. And then, you know, the market crashed and everything. So people are less, I don't know, less eager to buy artwork, you know. And along the way, my prices have gone up ridiculously. So, you know, those people that were always like, oh, I wish I'd have bought that when it was $300, you know, I wished you would have too, but it's not going to happen, you know. Add another zero, and now, you know, that's the price. And so it's a little frustrating at times, you know, as people are very eager to tell you that I would love it, I wish I could buy it. And it's like, well, you know, wishing isn't going to get you the artwork and, you know, me the money, so.
How do you see your prices? Does the gallery set the prices? Or
It's a difficult thing setting prices. You know, like way back when I had a show in Seattle, you talk with the dealer. What should these be? You know, it's this big. I've had a pretty good history. Then I dropped out of the scene for a while, and now I'm back having a show. So this should be $500. Let's see what that does. Those sold like instantly. So the next time, maybe it should be $600. And over a period of time, you start to learn, you know, what something is. Now, you know, something like this is $2,000. So you just, as you get more commissions, as you get better galleries, you know, as you know, do more things like this, it just kind of adds a little bit more to your resume, which makes the work that much more pricey. But a lot of it, I know some artists that won't have anything to do with pricing their own work. They're like, you know, if the dealer says this should be $1,700, then it's $1,700. And I don't know. I think that's a little weird. I think you should be involved in pricing your own work, because you're the one spending hours on end putting it together. And if it works out to where, at the end of the day you're making 12 cents an hour if you sell it, then, you know, something's got to change, I think. You know, and that's just one way of looking at it. You know, the other, of course, you can't sell it for $45,000 if you just graduated from college. You know, it's like, who are you and why do you think that that price should be there? So it's a real fine line. You know, I find that it's a weird, I call it the snob factor that's involved, that if your work is, you know, $75, people will kind of ignore it. But if the price is just up there where it seems a little bit out of the reach of some people, then people start to feel like, oh, if I buy this, then, you know, I'm buying real art. And so it gets this little, pricing gets a screwy thing. Exactly. You know, if it's $75, it must not be worth anything. But if it's, you know, $750, then maybe it's valuable, you know. And then if it's $7,500, it's really valuable. So that's the kind of snob factor thing that I always think about. And at what point can you say, this is, you know, as expensive as it can get and nothing else. So shall we all go and have cocktails now?
So please join me in thanking Robert for
Thank you very much.